Gunsmoke and Heartache, Book 1, Part 1 of the trilogy, a Western romance novella. Written by Lila Dawson. Chapter 6. Tabitha Henry. Mr. Henry paced on the front porch, his temper short with anyone who beckoned him to take a seat in his rocking chair. The men who rode out had stayed out later than he'd expected, and he was very much a worrier. The only one who hadn't made any effort to try to calm him was his wife, and I followed her lead. Even though I'd not yet been here a full day, it was already clear to me that Mrs. Henry was the emotional anchor for my uncle, and perhaps for everyone here on the farm, after being made painfully aware of my own emotional fragility, where I thought there'd been none. I found myself all the more impressed by her. At the same time, I was less judgmental of my pacing uncle. "We're going to get a few lanterns and ride out there. They should have been back by now," he said. "Now, dear, you know how Tom likes to talk. He probably saw the chance to spend his day chatting with the new neighbors instead of working, and did just that," Mrs. Henry replied in her usual, even tone. He sighed, continuing his pacing but not pushing the matter to ride out himself just yet. "Could have sworn I heard a gunshot earlier, but I couldn't hear it clearly." "Surely if there was shooting, there'd be more than one shot," Mr. Williams said, joining the three of us on the porch. He hesitated, rubbing his beard before continuing. "And if you think you might have heard shots, do you think we should go get the sheriff before we ride out ourselves?" My uncle stopped in his tracks momentarily, then ran his hand through his hair roughly, as though this new option just added another burden to his already heavy mind. "Maybe," he said, before continuing to pace. "Except that'll take a lot more time." Before the discussion could go further, we spotted several men riding in from the distance. My uncle quickly rushed off the porch to meet them, doing his best to appear as though he wasn't in a hurry. He stopped just at the bottom of the stairs. "Took you long enough," he said. "Yeah, well, Tom was awfully busy giving away a piece of your property to the new neighbor," Terrence said, as he dismounted, tying his horse off. "Shut up, Terrence. Nobody asked you," Tom said. Terrence looked annoyed, but thought better of saying anything else, at least not without my uncle to back him up. The two other men had stayed quiet from the start and seemed eager to depart. It was just a few feet of fence, and his deed did back up his claim. "I'm not thrilled to be speaking on your behalf, but I figured you'd value these men's lives over a couple of feet of fence on a 20 or 30-foot stretch." Mr. Henry nodded. "I trust you to be level-headed, that's why I sent you. We'll have to compare deeds to make it official, but he—" When Tom got off the horse, he stumbled, and my uncle grabbed his arm to steady him. He looked down and saw the blood. "Jesus, Tom. What happened?" "This here? Don't worry too much about that, Mr. Henry. It's just a flesh wound. The conversation may have ended cordially, but it certainly didn't start out that way." "Do you want me to have someone fetch the doctor? It won't hurt to have it looked at." Tom stepped back, seemingly offended. "No, like I said, it ain't much more than a scratch. I'll put a bandage on it, and it'll be good by morning." I wanted desperately to say something, but after the experience earlier today with the calf, I found myself lacking the confidence to speak up. He needed to be seen by a doctor. Surely everyone knew that. By morning, he could have a serious infection. Mr. Henry sighed. "If you say so, Tom, I won't force the matter. I know how much you dislike doctors." Tom limped toward the bunkhouse, waving off Mr. Williams' offer to help. The other men dispersed quickly, clearly eager to distance themselves from whatever consequences might follow their afternoon's adventure. Only Terrence lingered, shooting Tom dark looks that my uncle thankfully didn't notice. "Terrence, go see to the horses," Mr. Henry said, his tone showing enough deteriorating patience to end any desire to argue further, at least for now. As Tom disappeared into the bunkhouse, I found myself staring after him longer than I should have. The man was infuriating, stubborn, and had spent our entire wagon ride making me feel foolish. So why did I feel this strange irritation in my stomach as I watched him limp away, clearly in more pain than he was willing to admit? I guess I didn't just feel foolish. I very much was foolish. "Tabitha, dear, would you help me with supper?" Mrs. Henry asked, though it sounded more like a gentle command than a request. I nodded, grateful for something to occupy my hands and mind. Following her into the kitchen, I tried to push away the image of Tom stumbling as he dismounted, the dark stain spreading across his pant leg, and the sight of the poor calf struggling to take its first breaths while I stood there doing nothing. Mrs. Henry handed me a wooden spoon and pointed toward a large pot simmering on the stove. "Just stir that occasionally. Don't let it stick to the bottom." I took the spoon, focusing on the simple task. The kitchen was warm and filled with the comforting sense of whatever Mrs. Henry had been preparing. It reminded me of our cook back home, though I'd never been allowed to help in the kitchen there. According to my mother, only poor ladies cooked. "You look troubled," Mrs. Henry observed, not looking up from the bread she was slicing. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then caught myself. After today's events, I was beginning to question whether I was fine about anything. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. That man needs to see a doctor. Anyone can see that." Mrs. Henry smiled. "Tom's seen worse, I'm sure. Probably more than Marcus and I know about." "That's not the point. Even the toughest men can die from infections." "I get that you're worried, but trying to convince a man like that will just make him dig his heels in even more." It wasn't a question whether the man needed medical attention, but how quickly he needed it. That it was even up for discussion made heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't know why I should feel embarrassed for stating the obvious. "I'm worried about anyone who's too stubborn to seek proper medical care. Uncle should insist." Maybe." Mrs. Henry's response was non-committal, but I caught the slight curve of her lips. It felt a bit condescending. I stirred the pot more vigorously than necessary. "He was rude to me today. Insufferably rude." "Yes, I imagine he was." "Then why would I care if he—" I stopped myself, realizing how my voice had risen. Maybe a terrible infection would serve him right? Mrs. Henry set down her knife and looked at me directly. "Tabitha, caring about someone doesn't require liking everything about them. I'm sure most doctors dislike many of their patients. You don't have to feel embarrassed about being compassionate." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died in my throat. Was I worried about Tom? He'd made it clear he found me bothersome. "The man's ill-mannered. It's his choice if he wants to die from stubbornness," I said finally. "If you say so, dear." Her tone suggested she didn't believe me for a second, which was particularly irritating because I wasn't entirely sure I believed myself. A knock at the back door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Henry wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to reveal one of the young ranch hands I'd seen earlier. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Henry, but Tom's asking if you might have some clean bandages." Mrs. Henry glanced at me, then back at the young man. "Of course. Tabitha, would you take some supplies to him? I need to finish supper." My heart jumped. "I don't think that's appropriate. We barely know each other, and there are implications for a man and a woman having that kind of contact." "Nonsense. Your family, and he's injured. Besides, I'm sure he'd appreciate some help in tending the wound properly. You can—" How did you put it? Insist? Before I could protest further, Mrs. Henry had gathered clean cloth, a bottle of something that smelled strongly of alcohol, and a small jar of what looked like salve. She pressed them into my hands along with a basin of warm water. "Just clean it properly and bandage it tight. And if you're determined, don't let him argue with you about it." A few minutes later, I found myself standing outside the bunkhouse door, supplies in hand. Through the thin walls, I could hear Tom moving around inside, accompanied by occasional muttered curses that made me grateful for my limited exposure to such language. Language, my father always told me, was common among lesser men. I knocked hesitantly. "What?" came his gruff response. It's Tabitha. Mrs. Henry sent me with supplies for your wound." A long pause. "I can handle it myself." "Well, clearly you can't, or you wouldn't have asked for bandages." Another pause, longer this time. I was beginning to think he'd simply ignore me when the door opened. Tom stood in the doorway, his shirt removed, and a mostly bloody cloth pressed against his thigh. In the lamplight, I could see the wound clearly for the first time, a dark hole in his leg that was still seeping blood. My stomach lurched. I'd never seen a gunshot wound before, and I felt instantly lightheaded. "You look like you're about to pass out," he observed, holding out his hand. "Give me those and head back to the house." The dismissive tone in his voice sparked something in me. After my embarrassing performance with the calf earlier, I wasn't about to prove him right about my supposed weakness. "Move aside," I said, pushing past him into the small room. The bunkhouse was sparse but clean, just a bed, a small table, and a washstand. Tom's few possessions were neatly arranged, giving the space an almost military orderliness that surprised me. "Sit down," I commanded, setting the supplies on the table. Sit down." I used the same tone I'd heard Mrs. Henry employ earlier when she wanted no arguments. To my amazement, Tom complied, lowering himself onto the edge of the bed with a grimace. He kept the bloody cloth pressed to his leg, watching me warily as I arranged the bandages and salve. "This is probably going to hurt," I warned, dampening a clean cloth with the alcohol. "Won't be the first time." There was something in his voice, a resignation that spoke of experience with pain far beyond what any normal laborer should have endured. I found myself curious about his past, about what had brought him to this place. But I pushed the questions aside. I certainly didn't want to give him any impression that my interest extended anywhere beyond his wound. "Remove your hand," I said. He hesitated, then slowly lifted the makeshift bandage away. The wound was worse than I'd thought, not just a graze, but a proper bullet hole that had passed clean through the muscle. Blood welled up immediately, even hours later. Then again, he hadn't stayed off it properly, of course. I pressed the alcohol-soaked cloth against it without warning. Tom's sharp intake of breath was the only sign he gave of the pain, though I noticed his knuckles go white where he gripped the edge of the bed. "Sorry," I murmured, working as quickly as I could to clean the wound. "It has to be done properly, or I'll die of infection," he finished. "I know." Despite his gruff exterior, he held perfectly still while I worked, making my task easier. As I cleaned away the dried blood, I found myself stealing glances at his face. Without his usual scowl, he looked younger somehow, though still weathered by sun and hard work, and whatever else life had thrown at him. "There," I said finally, applying the salve as gently as I could. "Now the bandage." Wrapping the clean cloth around his thigh required me to get quite close to him, and I was acutely aware of his presence and his distinctly masculine scent. I could practically hear my mother's voice in my head scolding me about how inappropriate this was. My hands trembled slightly as I tied off the bandage, and I hoped he didn't notice. "You did good," he said quietly as I gathered up the soiled cloths. "I expected you to pass out." The unexpected praise caught me off guard. "I'm not that delicate." "Could have fooled me," he said. I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, the antagonism between us seemed to find an uneasy truce. You should have a doctor look at it tomorrow, I said. We'll see. I knew that was the best answer I was likely to get from him. Clearly, he did not intend to and only wanted to avoid the lecture. Standing up, I moved toward the door, then paused. Tom? Yeah? That was good of you, what you did today. Preventing bloodshed, I mean. He was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't respond. Finally, he sighed. Men are too eager to die. Sometimes for nothing at all. The seriousness of his tone caught me off guard, and once again I sensed a story behind it. Still, I had the feeling I'd already overstayed my welcome.
Chapter 7. Tom Rowland, 2 months later. Tom Rowland, you are the most stubborn man I've ever met, Tabitha shouted from the ground below, looking up at me with an almost inhuman rage. Whatever motherly spirit possessed this young woman, I prayed every day for it to be exercised. Won't even take another hour. Don't you have something better to do than bother me? I shouted back, not looking up from my work on the barn's roof. She'd managed to talk the other 2 men down nearly an hour ago, but the way I see it, I work for Mr. Henry, not his brat niece. A man died in this heat not 3 days ago. Are you stupid? Yep, I casually shouted in reply. Dumber than a box of steel rocks in a thunderstorm, my daddy always used to say. Your daddy did not say that. He sure did, I continued, hammering. If you distract me and make me fall off this roof, you'll feel awfully guilty. Her face went as red as mine, and I was badly sunburned. She clenched both fists tightly at her sides and stomped hard enough for me to hear all the way up on the roof. She growled, sounding more beast than woman, before storming off. About time. Maybe I could get this done sooner now that there was some peace and quiet. I had to pause to wipe the sweat out of my eyes, making my vision blurry. The sun's rays felt like a grinding stone on my blisters. Maybe the girl was right, but there was no way I could admit that now. Give an inch, they take a mile. This brat was already on my case enough. She reappeared before I could clear all the sweat from my eyes, and I felt something impact the side of the barn, not quite reaching the roof. Another growl from the little lady, and the next throw made it up. Throwing stuff at me isn't going to make me get down any sooner, I said casually. I soaked a towel in water. At least cool yourself down with it. She paused, unable to contain her emotions. Idiot, stupid man. I sighed, picking up the towel. At this point, the roof felt like a safer place to be. The moment the cool water touched my skin, a wave of relief washed over my whole body. It was one of the best feelings I'd ever experienced in my life. I draped it around my neck and continued working. Thanks, I said, reluctant to give her any praise she might interpret as encouragement. Now, go find something else to do. Without answering, she stomped away, still angry with me for reasons I couldn't quite understand. She'd been a pain in my rear since the moment she got here, and I was well past my patience wearing thin. Still, she was the boss's precious little niece, and I found the reserves to keep bearing it. Terence appeared over the top of the roof, climbing up the ladder on the other side. Your mother really is something else. Only man I know with a mother younger than him. I laughed, sliding the bucket of nails toward him so we both could reach it. She ain't just like that with me. She's a pain, is what she is. Wish Mrs. Henry would make her help out with the chores more so we could have some peace during the day. Terence shook his head, taking a nail from the bucket and hammering another shingle into place. You like to antagonize her a bit too, Tom. The rest of us were happy to have an excuse to take a break and cool off. Normally you would be too. Passing up a chance to slack off just ain't like you. I think you're doing it to spite the poor girl. I stopped my hammering and looked up at Terence. Oh, is that right? You're dangerously close to calling me lazy. Yeah? Dangerously close to telling the truth, then. That's a hurtful thing to say to a man that's been up here roofing alone for close to an hour in the summer heat. I think I know your problem, Terence said, resuming his hammering. Anybody starts talking to you about anything other than what we're doing, you start getting smart. You know, they say sometimes a man gets like that when his mother didn't hug him enough. I turned my gaze downward, resuming my own hammering. I'm told my mother was someone who liked to give a lot of hugs to her kids. Told? Oh. Right. Passed away from a fever when I was a baby. My daddy and older sister took care of me, though she wasn't much more than a kid herself. I was just fooling with that talk. Sorry, Tom. I didn't know that about your mother. Well, I shared something about myself, so now you can't claim I never do. Now, how about we get this roof finished before supper? Terence nodded, too embarrassed to say more. Truth is, I just said all that to shut the man up. I didn't know a single thing about my mother and wouldn't reveal it if I did. I could at least thank the woman, whoever she was and wherever she was, for helping me change the topic. It wasn't that I didn't ask my daddy about her, but the anger in his voice whenever I did broke me of that habit real quick. Looks like we'll still be done by sundown, he said. Mrs. Henry put on a big old pot of soup beans with some hog we slaughtered the other day. Now that woman knows how to cook. I wish her niece would spend more time learning from the woman instead of pestering the men out here. Terence grinned, speeding up his pace, maybe a little too much. I reckon she's one of those women who wishes she was born a man while having no clue what the life of being a man actually is. Me and you don't know what being a woman's like either, Terence. Why don't you slow it down a bit? It ain't like those soup beans are going to disappear if we're 10 minutes late to dinner. But if we have to come back up here after the next rain and fix something, neither one of us is going to be happy about it. He slowed his pace, but only a little. You don't know that, Tom. Last time you said that, we ended up not getting any dinner at all, much less cold. Just keep hammering, big guy, and we might not even be late. You just told me to slow down. Tom, you're just as bad as little Miss Henry. Twice as pretty. Now come on, let's... I paused, spotting several men riding in from the distance. Lawmen by the look of it. Now, if there's one thing you can't fault the girl on, it's her looks. He followed my gaze. Looks like a few deputies. If you want to head down there and see what they need, I'll finish up here. I didn't answer, just kept watching them. I heard him but barely registered a word he said. He waved his hand in front of my face. Hey, Tom, you in there? I said you can head... You go take care of it. I can't stand those men, I said, grabbing another shingle and hammering away. Scared of hard work, scared of guns, scared of doctors, and now you're scared of lawmen too? My stomach was in knots. Well, maybe there's a reason I became a ranch hand. Not every man has to be some famous gunslinger. Yeah. Fair enough, Terence said, tossing his hammer on the roof and backing toward the ladder. At least I won't have to worry about missing the soup beans. Be a pal and set a bowl back for me. Least you can do dipping out of the job early. Terence narrowed his eyes at me as he disappeared over the edge. I took a deep breath, and then several more. Last thing I wanted to deal with today.
Chapter 8. Tabitha Henry. I wonder what those deputies want, my aunt said, pulling back the curtain in the kitchen and peering out. Nothing ever escaped this woman's notice. Hopefully nothing bad, I said, so focused on the pie crust I was struggling with that I hadn't even noticed them riding up in the first place. I'm going to join Marcus and see what they have to say. While I'm gone, "You head out to the cellar and get a few cans of beans," she said, dropping the curtain and heading toward the front door without waiting for my response. Exactly the opposite of what I was hoping she'd say. By now, I'd regained my confidence, and with it, returned my irritation with my situation. And the men here, who seemed to share a single brain among the lot. Still, I'd learned a lot from my aunt in the past couple of months. I now knew my way around the kitchen pretty well, considering I'd never been allowed to touch anything in my very fancy one back home. I was also in awe of how she seemed to always know exactly what to say and do in every situation. She was as level-headed as any man under stress, and, unlike me, everyone listened to her and followed her advice. If she put her foot down, no one argued. Even though she had never produced children of her own, it was as though she was everyone's mother. As much as I wanted to be nosy, if she asked me to go fetch green beans, that's what I would do. Heading out the back door, the only person in sight was the incredibly stubborn Mr. Rowland, who had become the most insufferable of all. It was for that reason I never understood why my uncle called him the most reliable man on the ranch, when I asked why he kept a man like that around. Reliably unreliable, perhaps. No respect for women, save for my aunt, and very little for anyone else. He could never be found when you needed him for work, yet refused to take breaks when you didn't want him to work. It was as if the man had fashioned his entire existence to spite me. He regarded me with a brief nod before returning to the roofing, and I simply turned my head away in response. I could see the man's sunburns from here. Opening the cellar door, I stepped down, enjoying the cool air that hit me as I descended deeper. After browsing a few of the shelves directly in front of me, I picked up a glass jar of green beans and studied the seal on top. That was when I felt a hand grip my mouth and the unmistakable feeling of a knife against my neck. It burned as I felt the blade break skin, and a line of blood run down my neck. I was frozen, unable to speak or move, and utterly terrified of what might follow. "Don't say a word. You scream, I slice that pretty neck of yours wide open." I nodded, fighting back the tears already forming in my eyes. My mind flooded with all the possibilities, which only seemed to paralyze me even more. As he pulled me back, my legs barely held me up. "Walk," he growled. "You must be the farmer's daughter, huh? A ranch owner could pay pretty good money to get his sweet little girl back unharmed." I knew then it wasn't one of the ranchers. This man was a stranger, and I had the presence of mind to piece things together. The deputies that showed up. This was probably an escaped outlaw. My blood ran colder than the draft from the cellar. A man like this had nothing to lose and wouldn't think twice about hurting anyone. Or worse. I nodded, stepping slowly up the stairs as he turned me around. I tried to get a glimpse of his face in the glass of a jar as we passed, but it was impossible in the dim lighting that came in from the cellar door. I prayed that someone, anyone, might see us and help. I saw a glimpse of Mr. Rowland as we exited, but I was certain he hadn't seen us. I looked around and saw no one else. They'd all gone to the front of the house to speak to the deputies. I turned back toward the barn, hoping to signal Mr. Rowland in some way, only to find he'd disappeared into thin air. Typical of the man. Now he takes a break of all times, or he'd more likely ended his work for the day to join everyone for supper. They'd notice I was gone soon, but by then, this man would have dragged me off to who knows where. My tears ran freely now. There was no one to help me. I'd never been so terrified in my entire life. I found myself missing the sheltered life I had before and my father's guards. All the servants watching me like hawks. Nothing like this would have ever happened at home. I was a prisoner there too, or a marriage token. But this was worse. No matter what this man had planned for me, all of it was worse. I considered risking it all and screaming, but he sensed my growing boldness and pressed the knife harder against my throat again, clamping his hand down hard enough over my mouth that my teeth cut into my lips. I thought for a moment he might break my front teeth from the sheer pressure of his hand. Don't even think about screaming. You hear me? Nobody here can run quick enough to stop you from bleeding out. I killed a woman and 2 men already, and I've got no problem adding you. Play your cards right, and you won't get hurt. I'll need your daddy to pay up, after all. I nodded again, panic setting in as we entered the thick cornfield. After a few steps in, no one would see us, and maybe no one would see me ever again. We continued on for a few seconds longer, then stopped. The man tensed, and I wondered if he had stepped on a snake. Whatever it was, he didn't move a muscle. You feel that? A different man's voice said. Turn around, and I'll put a hole right through you. Trust me, I've got no problem shooting a man like you in the back. It sounded familiar, but in my panic, I couldn't place it. The man holding me hesitated for a moment, but then I felt his grip loosen and the knife slowly move away from my neck. I stumbled a few steps forward, then turned. He was wearing a bandana over his face, but I recognized him easily. It was Mr. Rowland. He held his finger to his lips, stopping me as I was about to scream for help. My kidnapper saw this as his chance and quickly turned with his knife swinging as he did. Before he could turn halfway around, a hammer caught him in the head and he crumpled to the ground. I covered my mouth and took another step back. In 2 big steps, Mr. Rowland was standing in front of me, squeezing my shoulders hard enough to cause me pain. For a moment, I thought I heard him asking me if I was all right. Maybe that's what I was hoping he'd ask or expecting. You want to thank me? Here's how. I wasn't here. Got it? You had a chance to pick up the hammer as he was dragging you away. Then when the man was distracted by something he heard, you hit him as hard as you could. Count to 100, then scream. They'll all come running except me. We clear? My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. The bandana to hide his face, demanding I pretend he didn't save me, that he wasn't here. Is he dead? I asked, unable to take my eyes away from the blood pooling beneath him on the ground. I wasn't sure why I asked that. It wasn't the most pressing thing on my mind. Are we clear? He repeated, his anger startling me as much as the shake that came with it. I nodded. We're clear. You're hurting me, Mr. Rowland. He let go instantly, as though he'd touched a hot stove, then left. I did just as he asked, counting slowly to 100 before screaming as loud as I could. I picked up the hammer and clutched it tightly to my chest.
Chapter 9. Tom Rowland. Where were you the whole time, Tom? Mr. Henry shouted, shoving me backward a few steps. Sorry, Mr. Henry. I'd been up on that hot roof all day, and when I finally went to take a break in the barn, I guess I fell asleep. You fell asleep so hard that you didn't hear a woman scream, and you were gone over an hour. We started to wonder if one of them had dragged you off somewhere too, Buster said. The deputies had already left, satisfied with collecting the man they were looking for and having no other reason to stick around. Much to my relief. What do you want me to say, Buster? I'm sorry. It's not like I heard and just didn't help on purpose. Just bad timing. Mr. Henry opened his mouth to speak again, and something about the angry look on his face told me I had yet to get the worst of it. My best guess was he was about to fire me. However, before he could speak, Tabitha grabbed his arm. Please, Uncle, let's stop fighting about this. It wasn't Tom's fault. I just really want to sit down and have dinner right now. All of us. But, Marcus Henry, that is enough, Mrs. Henry said, her voice firm but calm. Her tone didn't leave any room for argument, not even from the proud Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry's expression softened almost instantly as he glanced at his family and all the ranch hands present. After a moment he sighed, nodded, then turned back toward the house. He motioned for all of us to follow as he walked. I knew the worst wasn't over. Tabitha wouldn't let this go, and the questions would come pouring in sooner or later. For now, the poor girl seemed shaken up enough that interrogating me could wait. Seeing someone die will do that to a person, especially the first time it happens. Less so with the second, and so on. "You're lucky Mr. Henry didn't flog you with a whip for that one, Tom," Buster said, walking close to me, speaking low enough that the others couldn't hear. I couldn't tell if he was relieved it didn't come to that or disappointed. Can't say I'd blame the man for it. If that was your niece, wouldn't you? "I hope the girl handles things all right," he said, ignoring my question. "She'll be all right eventually. Ain't that the way it is with everything?" Buster shook his head, a faint smile forming on his lips. "Depends on what you call all right, Tom. Sure, the hurt of something can go away over time, but the changes it makes in a person stick around. Some things stay with you the rest of your life, like being whipped, come to think of it. When I'm old and gray, I reckon that'll still be with me." It was easy to forget that Buster was born and raised a slave, especially considering how much he liked telling everyone what to do. Going from being a slave to being a foreman was a big change, but one Buster adjusted to with no effort. "Yeah, I suppose that would stick with a man. Lots of things do." He responded with only a grunt and a nod, having said everything he wanted to on the matter, though I knew full well it wasn't luck. If Tabitha hadn't stepped in, I'd be packing my things right now instead of heading to dinner. Can't say she didn't owe me one for saving her life. Dinner was quieter than usual. Mrs. Henry had outdone herself with the soup beans and cornbread, but most of us just pushed food around our bowls. Even the younger hands, who usually chattered and boasted through meals, seemed to understand this wasn't the time for their usual antics. Tabitha sat directly across from me but kept her eyes fixed on her bowl. She'd barely touched her food, which wasn't lost on Mrs. Henry. "Tabitha, dear, you've barely eaten anything," Mrs. Henry observed, her voice gentle with concern. "I know you've been through a lot today, but you should at least fill your belly." "I'm fine, Aunt Jane. Just not very hungry." "I understand. Maybe you should rest early tonight." "Maybe." Tabitha's voice was distant, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Mr. Henry cleared his throat. "I've decided we're going to post an armed guard at night for the next few weeks, just until we're certain there aren't any other undesirables in the area." "That's wise," Buster agreed. "I can take the first watch tonight." "No need for that," I said, perhaps too quickly. "I'll take first watch." Killing, no matter the number of notches on the belt or the cause, never made for an easy rest. At least not the first night. "That's good of you, Tom," Mr. Henry said, though his tone suggested he was still very much angry with me. I kept my mouth shut and continued eating. No point in making things worse by saying anything. What could I say? Terrence broke the silence. "Lucky thing that hammer was lying around where you could reach it, Miss Henry. Could have been a lot worse if you hadn't been quick thinking." Tabitha nodded without looking up. "Yes. Very lucky. I'm thankful to Tom for letting it slide off the roof earlier." I could hear something strained in her voice, but the others seemed to take her at face value. She was sticking to the story, just like she'd agreed. "Takes real courage to do what you did," Buster added. "Most folks would have been too scared to think straight. Not sure I'd have been half as brave." "I was scared," she said quietly. "Terrified, actually. But you kept your head anyway. I've never met your ma, but you sure are a Henry woman through and through. Tabitha finally looked up, but her eyes found me instead of Buster. There was something in her expression I couldn't quite place. Not anger exactly, but questions. Lots of them, I had a feeling. "Sometimes you just do what you have to do," she said, still looking at me. "And no one should feel ashamed of that." Mr. Henry reached over and squeezed his niece's hand. "I'm proud of you, Tabitha, and grateful you're safe. You need anything, you just let anybody here know." She turned to him and managed a small smile. "Thank you, Uncle. That means a lot." The conversation moved on to other things. The repairs still needed on the barn, plans for the next day's work, speculation about whether the weather would hold. Normal ranch talk that helped ease the tension in the room. But I could feel Tabitha's eyes on me throughout the meal, even when I wasn't looking directly at her. She was thinking hard about something, and that made me nervous. The girl was too smart for her own good and definitely too smart for mine. Thinking I'd ever be able to stave off her curiosity for good was a fool's errand, but I couldn't just watch the girl get dragged off. When dinner ended, the men began to file out. Some nodded their good nights, others just headed for the bunkhouse or their evening chores without a word. I started to follow, but Mrs. Henry's voice stopped me. "Tom, would you mind helping Tabitha carry the dishes to the kitchen? I need to speak with Marcus about something." Before I could make an excuse, she and Mr. Henry had disappeared into the front room, leaving me alone with Tabitha and a table full of dirty dishes. Not that I'd have given Mrs. Henry any excuses anyway. We worked in silence for a few minutes, stacking bowls and gathering utensils, but I could feel the weight of unasked questions hanging between us like a storm cloud. Finally, as we carried the last of the dishes into the kitchen, she spoke. "You're not going to tell me what really happened out there, are you?" I set the dishes down by the wash basin and turned to face her. "You know what happened? You were there?" "I was there." She crossed her arms, studying my face. "But there are things that don't make sense." "Such as?" "Such as why you had a bandana covering your face. Such as why you don't want anyone to know you helped me." I leaned against the counter, trying to look casual despite the knot forming in my stomach. "Maybe you were just confused, scared. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're in danger." She shook her head. "My mind wasn't playing tricks, Tom. You saved my life, and for some reason, you don't want credit for it. You're modest, but not that modest." "Why?" I looked out the kitchen window, watching the last light fade from the sky. How could I explain? It was simple. I couldn't. "Some things are better left alone," I said finally. "So leave it alone." "Is that your answer for everything? Just leave it alone?" "It's my answer for this. Don't you owe me that much?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe she was going to let it go. But then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I meant what I said earlier. Thank you. Whatever your reasons. I'll respect that. But I won't forget what you did." The gratitude in her voice made something twist uncomfortably in my chest. I wasn't used to being thanked, especially not by her. "Just stick to the story," I said. "That's all the thanks I need." She nodded, but I could tell this conversation wasn't over in her mind. It was just postponed, and maybe not for long. Normally, seeing a man killed before your eyes was enough to shut down your logic for a day or two. But that was apparently not true of Tabitha Henry, and that worried me more than any outlaw with a knife ever could.
Chapter 10. Tabitha Henry. I stood at my bedroom window for a long while, looking out over the vast wilderness that stretched from my uncle's property. Despite the performance I'd put on, I was not in the state of mind for sleep. Not this night, and perhaps not even the next. The image replayed in my mind over and over. Tom's hammer coming down and striking the man in the head, the way he fell to the ground, the look on his face as his final breaths escaped. I could have gone my whole life without seeing a man die. And now that I had, it was something I'd never be able to unsee. At moments, I even wondered if Tom might have somehow avoided it, but there was no way that would happen without risking his own life and mine. He'd already tried to fool the man with the wooden handle of his hammer. He wouldn't have worn a bandana if he'd planned to kill the man from the start. No. Tom had intended to scare him off. I'd stood there thinking of myself, but I'd failed to consider what Tom might be going through right now. He seemed okay, but everyone thought I was as well. I wasn't okay. I paced from one end of my room to the other, toying with one of the curls of my blonde hair. I'd taken my hair down, but hadn't bothered undressing. It would be inappropriate to go to him right now, wouldn't it? Then again, since when have I cared about propriety? I opened my door as quietly as I could, moving carefully down the stairs and out the front door. Tom turned his head only partway to confirm the identity of the person coming out, then fixed his gaze forward again. The rifle sat lazily in his lap, as though he might not even realize it was there. He rocked slowly back and forth in the rocking chair, and I stood in front of the empty one beside him. "May I join you, Mr. Roland?" I asked. He did not answer. He only nodded, not bothering to look at me as he did. I sat, opening my mouth to speak, only to find I hadn't prepared the words in advance, and was therefore unable to say anything. I closed my mouth, relaxing in my chair to mirror his calm demeanor, and chose instead to sit in silence with him for several minutes before giving it another try. "You have some idea of what I want to ask, don't you?" I said, as though I were a deputy about to begin my interrogation. I realized my tone and immediately felt embarrassed. "Not that you have to tell me anything." "Nope," he replied, still not looking at me. "Do you mean you don't know what I'm going to ask, or that you're not going to answer?" I asked, smiling, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's go with both," he said. "Mind if I make some guesses then?" Tom sighed, looking at me for the first time since I'd joined him. "You know what? Let's hear them. It'll kill the time." "You're an outlaw, aren't you?" I asked. The question itself felt dangerous, but what kind of man would hurt a woman he'd just saved, even if the question was out of line? "You're bold to ask a man holding a rifle that, all alone," he said, laughing quietly. "I'm not scared of you, Tom. And it isn't because I'm brave. It's because you're a kind man, in spite of your stubbornness." His expression shifted immediately, and his grip tightened on the rifle in his lap, enough to turn his knuckles white in the lantern light. He looked away, but not before I glimpsed the pain in his expression. Why had he laughed at being accused of being an outlaw, but recoiled so strongly at being called kind? "You don't know me," he said. The words sounded halfway between the growl of an animal and the strained voice of a child trying not to cry. "I'm sorry," I said, clutching at the fabric of my dress in my lap. Communicating with people was never my best skill. "But that's what I believe." "Go back inside," he said. "No," I snapped back. "Look, just leave me alone. Ever consider maybe I offered to do the first watch because I want to be by myself?" "I'm not leaving," I said again, crossing my arms. He laughed. "Right, and I'm stubborn. I'm the stubborn one." "Okay, fine. If you insist on sitting out here and bothering me, tell me what it was like to grow up as a rich kid. I'd like to experience it secondhand." It was meant to cut me, to frustrate me into leaving and going back inside. Instead, I took advantage of the opening to give him exactly what he asked for and stay. "When I was little, I had a really great teacher, Ms. Yates. I looked up to her so much that I decided I wanted to be a teacher too. I must have been about 8 years old at the time, so she probably thought it was a cute thing for a child to say, and nothing more. Kids say those sorts of things all the time about what they want to be when they grow up. Tom nodded and seemed to be listening attentively, which surprised me. I half expected him to get angry and insist again that I leave. Seeing him finally accept my company encouraged me to continue, though this was a story that part of me hoped I wouldn't have the chance to finish. After a couple of years, I hadn't changed my mind. Somewhere along the line, she realized I was serious. She knew full well my background and what would be expected of me, but in what might be seen as cruelty. She supported and encouraged me. When I was 12, she offered to let me stay late after school to help her with grading papers and putting together lessons. I loved it. My parents normally never agreed to let me do anything I wanted to do, but this time they did. They seemed happy I was doing extra work after school and receiving high praise from my teachers. It gave them something to brag about at parties, and bragging is particularly important for the wealthy, especially when it comes to their kids. Not just the wealthy, he said. Perhaps you're right there. I suppose everyone would like to be seen as more than they are, or less, I said, looking at him again. He looked away in obvious discomfort. Sorry for interrupting. Continue the story. I did this for nearly a year. Shortly before I turned 13, Ms. Yates's health took a turn. Her condition only worsened as the weeks went on, until it became clear this was not something she would recover from. She announced that she would not be coming back for the next school year. When my 13th birthday came, she gave me a gift, a journal, where she'd made all her notes. She'd planned to write a book one day to help young educators learn the best ways to communicate with young students. But her illness made this impossible. I suppose she thought giving me her notes would be the next best thing. I mustered up the courage to tell my mother and father what I planned to do once I finished school. I wanted to be a teacher, and now I had the best tool in the world given to me by such a wonderful teacher. Their response was instant. I was forbidden from becoming a teacher. My father had already begun speaking with other families about who I might marry. I was called ungrateful and unruly. I hesitated for a moment, not sure I wanted to continue. I'd never told anyone this, and wasn't sure why I'd decided to now. This must be the good part. Well, now you can't leave. Gotta at least finish the story before you go. I managed to force a smile, though it must have been a terrible one. The fight became quite heated. My brothers joined in, hurling their own insults. My mother was shouting at me. I'd never seen my father so angry. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, he grabbed the book from my hands. He hurried to our stove, still in a rage. He shoved one of our servants aside and threw it in. I watched it catch fire, and in that moment, I wanted to jump in with it. I always thought, in my naive child's mind, that my parents truly did love me deep down. They just showed it in their own way, perhaps. That moment I realized my family didn't love me at all. My body, and I suppose my womb in particular, was a tool. No different from a hammer to put down shingles on a roof or an umbrella in the rain. A person doesn't love their tool. They just strive to use it in the way that benefits them the most. No, I've definitely seen men love their tools. I hated that story, by the way. You ruined that spoiled princess image I had in my mind, and now I'll never forgive you for it. The deadpan way he said it made me laugh, despite the terrible memory I'd just dredged up. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm sure there have been plenty of princesses who went through similar experiences. Ah, so you do see yourself as a princess. My mistake. When the candlelight caught his eyes, I felt something shift in me. An uncomfortable and unfamiliar warmth came to my cheeks, and I reached up to touch one of them. I quickly pushed the thought from my mind. Maybe there's a terrible story you'd like to share? I'd imagine there's still plenty of time left on your watch. All right, he said to my surprise. If you're enjoying our audio content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.